And I hope the audio comes out all right on this video. I don't own a microphone. Everything's being filmed on an iPhone. But I'm not going to invest a lot of money in this YouTube channel just yet. I'm not monetized. I won't be for a while. I don't have a Patreon. But what I do is sell a lot of knives on Facebook. Sell a lot of knives on knives and other articles on Etsy. If you're looking for a polished video, I'm not your guy. One of my Facebook friends had asked about material selection. And what I primarily use for blade work, most of the time, is bought stock. This is 1/8 by 1.5 inch. It's 1095 steel. This is 1/8 by 1/4 inch. This is 1084 steel. The 10 series steels are what's known as hypoeutectoid. I won't get into all the science of that. It'd be boring. Suffice it to say that with the 10 series steel, the last two numbers tell you how many points of carbon are in the blade. You need at least 60 points carbon to make a good blade. Lower carbon contents, 1060-ish. They're good for big choppers. They're good for blades that need an obtuse edge that are going to see abuse. It's a softer steel once it's heat treated, and it'll stand up to that abuse a little more readily. The 1095, this can be a little tricky on the heat treat because it's dancing the line between hypoeutectoid and hypereutectoid with the amount of carbon that's in it. But this makes a fine small cutter. The edge will get hard as woodpecker lips. Great stuff. I prefer to work in bought steels, in known steels, because I know my heat treat. I know what my heat treat needs to be. I don't have to do a lot of experimentation. Now, for those of you out there that are just starting out, maybe you don't want to use bought stock. Don't know why. It's cheap. It's not hard to find. But a lot of people like to work in scrap. A lot of people like to work in junk. I say junk. I can say junk. And the first thing everybody starts working on is the railroad spike. Now, this railroad spike was legally obtained. Don't just go walking down the tracks and picking them up. That is not legal. I don't care if there's a pile of railroad people left and it's just laying there rusting down. It doesn't matter. It's not legal. Don't pick it up. This one has HC marked on the head, which means high carbon. Don't get all excited by that. High carbon for a railroad spike is still only a little over 30 points of carbon. So it will not make a great knife. Will it make a functional knife? Yes. Will you need to sharpen that knife quite often? Yes. Does it make a pretty shelf sitter? Yes. But for a good knife, this is just not sufficient. Now, it can be made sufficient by splitting the spike and forge welding in a piece of high carbon. I've done that a few times. Doesn't sell really well for me. I know some guys have made a career out of doing that, and they turn out some great stuff, great knives with the railroad spike head. I don't like them. Solid steel with a railroad spike head on a high carbon blade, it makes the blade too heavy. It puts the balance point in the wrong spot, and this is really never going to be a comfortable handle. I don't care what you do to it, unless you forge it out flat and put on wooden scales or G10 or whatever your flavor of choice is. It's not going to be a great knife, regardless. But what will make a great knife that you can sometimes find is this. This is truck spring. As a matter of fact, it's still got the manufacturer's sticker on it. This is a cutoff from a custom spring shop. It was sent to me by a friend. Most springs are 5160 steel or an equivalent. And it makes good knives. Makes great large choppers. And for a smaller knife, it'll also forge out and the edge will be plenty hard enough. If you've got a spring shop around, see if you can get the cutoffs. Makes a great knife. Going to the junkyards, finding old car springs, truck springs, things like that. Good practice. Sometimes they work. Sometimes old material like this, coil springs, garage door springs, the truck springs, old material like this will have stress fractures that you cannot see until you're done forging. And you put hours of work into that blade. You've done your finishing, you've done your hand work, you've done your hand rubbing, you've done everything you know you should do to make a great knife. And then if you're like me, before you send it out to a customer or put it to use yourself, you're going to test it. And when you test it, it breaks. Not always because you made a mistake in the forging or the heat treat. A lot of times old stock has stress fractures that you just cannot see. I don't trust old stock. Sometimes I use it if the customer asks, but I'm careful about what I use and I'm careful about testing before I send out a finished product. Moving on from that, blade stock. Now my favorite material for tooling is 4140. It's a good steel, it's tough. It's one of the older tool steel alloys. Heat treat's not hard on 4140. Easily found in car axles. The half axles in the front of the cars, the old truck axles, usually 4140. This is my hardy cutter. It goes in the anvil, in the hardy hole, and you put your stock on top, smack it with a hammer, and cut your stock to length. This is 4140. It's 5 years old. It's not pretty, because when I make things that I'm going to use, they don't have to be pretty. If I were making it for a customer, it would have to be pretty. But this is great stuff for tooling. Works great for large punches. Tools like this, tooling under the power hammer, makes great fullers, things like that, properly heat treated. As far as chisels go back to your coil spring. Coil spring makes great chisels, center punches, things like that. Old Allen wrenches, also great stuff. Makes great punches. If you can find some of the larger ones, forge them into what you want. Makes great punches. Also makes perfectly serviceable chisels if you've got good ones. Another thing that folks like to use is files. Old steel cutting files. Be careful with those. Old Nicholson brand files are great. Newer ones are okay too. Black Diamond brand files are great. A lot of the stuff that's out there now is Chinese. It's case hardened steel. You can forge a blade out of it and make it pretty, but it's not going to harden up and make a decent knife. Don't bother wasting your time unless you just want to practice. For hooks, candlesticks, plant hangers, whatever decorative items you want to make, mild steel. This is a piece of 1/2-inch mild steel, was bought from a local steel supplier. Stuff like this can also be bought in your local big box agricultural stores, home improvement stores. A lot of times it's labeled as weldable steel in those places. It's expensive in the big box stores. If you can find a local steel supplier and buy stock from them, it will be multitudes cheaper than buying from any big box store. Great stuff for anything that you're doing decorative. If you're doing a handrail, if you're doing a mailbox stand, if you're doing a fireplace set, this is the stuff you want. Now, I've gone around and did the junkyard shopping when I started, just to recap, and it wasn't all it was cracked up to be. A junkyard is a junkyard for a reason. Start out with what you got, though. If you got a bunch of scrap laying around, start with that. Just get started. But if you want to make good stuff, go ahead and buy some steel that you know what it is. Buy some steel that you can know the heat treat to. Buy some steel that'll make a fine blade. Merry Christmas, everybody. If I don't see you again before then, and have a blessed day.